My name is Dr. Michelle Coletti. I'm an occupational therapist with over 30 years of experience working with children with severe autism. I am going to share a PowerPoint presentation with you, which goes over some of the tenets of how I work with children with autism and why I do what I do. So I've called this Treating Severe Autism Through the Understanding of Neurophysiology. Again, my name is Dr. Michelle Coletti. I'm an occupational therapist, and I want to share my 30 plus years of knowledge with you so you can minimize the effects of severe autism with your child or with your client. So, to me, this is the basis of severe autism, that there is chaos in the body, which leads to chaos in the brain, which leads to chaos in behavior. So, people with autism, with severe autism, are in a chronic state of physiological dysregulation. This means that they're basically in perpetual states of fight, flight, or freeze. There have been several studies using various methods that show that the physiologies of the children are so dysregulated that it shows up on scans and various testing measures. This chaos in the body affects the functioning of uh, the brain of people with autism. So the chaos in the body leads to chaos in the brain. And one of the ways that you can see this is in the incoherent sensory processing of people with severe autism. There's a book by a woman named Temple Grandin called Thinking in Pictures and Other Reports from My Life in Autism, where she talks about her experience living with autism and that she's interviewed other people also. So this is a quote. I always hated to be hugged. It was just too overwhelming. It was a great all engulfing tidal wave of stimulation. But some people with autism have severe body boundaries. If they can't see their legs, then they do not know where they are. Minor noises that most people can tune out drove me to distraction. When I was in college, my roommate's hairdryer sounded like a jet plane. When I was little, loud noises were also a problem, often feeling like a dentist drill hitting a nerve. They actually caused pain. When I look someone straight in the eye, particularly someone I am not familiar with, I feel as if their eyes are burning me, and I really feel like I'm looking into the face of an alien. There's another woman, her name is Donna Williams, and she describes a fractured perception of her body in which she could only perceive one part at a time. She would tap rhythmically and sometimes slap herself to determine where her body boundaries were. When her senses became overloaded with stimuli, she would bite herself, but not knowing that she was biting her own hand. So, in summary, chaos in the brain is presented in incoherent sensory processing. Individuals with autism have an incoherent experience of the world. Sounds are too loud or cause pain. Eye contact hurts. Some people can only process one sensation at a time. And obviously, this would curtail the ability of anybody, any person, to interact with other people or with the world. So, this is another way that the chaos in the brain presents itself in something called functional connectivity. So, functional connectivity measures how well the different areas of the brain, the different lobes of the brain, communicate with each other. It's measured via EEG. High coherence means there's high functional connectivity, which means there's strong signals between the lobes of the brain. You can think of it as like a strong internet signal. Low coherence means there's low functional connectivity, which means there's weak signals. So the brain areas aren't communicating well to each other. So here is just a schematic of the different lobes of the brain. The red is the frontal lobe, the yellow is the temporal lobe, the dark blue is the occipital lobe, and the aqua, we can call it aqua, is the parietal lobe. Now, in the back of the frontal lobe, is the area that controls motor, and the front of the parietal lobe is the area that controls touch. The very, very front of the frontal lobe is the area that we talk about that plays a big role in executive functioning. And executive functioning is the ability to make decisions, plan for the future, uh, all of that kind of processing. So there have been studies done with people with autism that shows that people with autism have very low functional connectivity. It is suggested that connectivity within frontal lobes is excessive, disorganized, and inadequately selective, whereas connectivity between frontal cortex and other systems is poorly synchronized, weakly responsive, and information impoverished. So there's not much information that's getting to that executive functioning place, and the information that's getting there is disorganized. It's not it's all jumbled up. So we have the chaos in the body, which leads to the chaos in the brain, and this leads to chaos in behavior. And we can think of self-stimulatory behaviors as this way, that it is the output of the chaos in the body and which causes the chaos in the brain. We could also think about the difficulty or inability of children with severe autism to form relationship as also being chaos and behavior. So what is the opposite of chaos? How do we go from chaos to coherence? A coherence, we can think of this word as being the opposite of chaos. So there's a wonderful research institute called the Heart Math Institute, and they have done wonderful studies looking at the heart and how it impacts all the different other systems of the body. So what they've discovered is that there's actually a state of our physiology called psychophysiological coherence, meaning that the various systems of our bodies and certain brainwave patterns actually cohere to each other in a similar rhythm. And this state is associated with sustained states of positive emotions. So the next slide is going to be a graphic representation of physiological coherence, and this image is courtesy of the Heart Math Institute. So here on the left, you can see respiration, heart rate, and blood pressure. And on the left-hand side of the slide, you can see that the lines are really jaggly, right? They're and they're just very jaggly. But then there's that dotted line in the center, and then to the right of that, we see a much more coherent pattern. The definition of coherence is that it's a wave that looks more like a sine wave on a graphic readout. And here you can see the blood pressure, the heart rate, the respiration after the quick coherence. And in this case, they had taught people how to meditate to get into a state of sustained positive emotions. So before was just the baseline. And then they go into their meditation where they have that sustained state of positive emotions. And then, oh, their systems become coherent with each other. How do we help our kids with severe autism achieve coherence? Well, we do it by Synchronizing our synchronizing ourselves to our kids' rhythms is synonymous with attuning to them. And now we're going to talk a little bit about uh, the attachment literature. And attachment is the study of how babies make relationships with their parents. And in the attachment literature, they talk about that the first step in attachment is attunement. So again, attuning is synchronizing ourselves to our infant's rhythm, if we're talking about young babies, or if we want to work with kids on the spectrum, we can attune our rhythms to our kids on the spectrum. Now, in the attachment literature, they talk about the key mechanism behind attunement is the perception and production of similarity. So, for the infant to attune to the parent, First, the parent has to attune to the infant. Now, attachment literature basically talks about there's three main methods of attunement. And with these methods, this is not something that parents think about that they're doing consciously. This is just how parents typically interact and play with their young infants. But there were seminal studies done back in the 70s where they would bring uh, moms would bring babies into the lab, and basically the researchers just said, "Hey, just do what you normally do with your baby," and they would videotape it, and then they would look at they would analyze the videotapes, and what they found was that naturally and unconsciously, the parents were imitating their infants. The mother would match the mood of the infant. The parents would imitate hand movements, smiles, frowns, whatever the facial expression was. Um, and there's a researcher who talks about imitation, and she looks at imitation as being an interaction that allows something to be shared between two people. So another way to attune is to match temporal patterns. So the coordination of rate, rhythm, pausing, and reaction time determine whether two streams of behavior are correlated and provides another avenue in which social relatedness is organized, though not necessarily in conscious awareness. And we have a sense of that in our everyday life, right? When we have conversations with other people, if we're having a conversation with someone who talks and then kind of pauses so that you can start talking, then there's a nice rhythm there, right? But if you're trying to have a conversation with someone who just never pauses, well, how you gonna when do you talk, right? Because they're not stopping, they're not giving a pause so that you can coordinate with them. So rhythmicity makes human relations predictable, which is great for infants who are trying to figure everything out. So the third method is called vitality contours. You can think about vitality contours as providing the qualitative aspect of experience. They're forms of feeling, and they're involved with all vital processes, right? We all breathe, we all get hungry, we all have to relieve our bladders or move our bowels, we all fall asleep, we all wake up. Well, there's feeling states associated with all of these uh, activities. So, vitality contours um, they give a quality to the intensity, speed, or shape of an experience. So I can be a little bit hungry, or I can be like really hungry. I can move slow, or I can move fast. There's smiles that grow steadily and slowly, others that explode, and some progress slowly and then suddenly burst open, right? So this gives the feel of the vitality contour. So they mark the pattern of experience all of over time. So these are three ways that parents just automatically, not consciously, just naturally attune to their children. However, we can actually use these methods of attunement consciously with our kids with severe autism. So, an infant develops a sense of self from seeing their own movements mirrored by the actions of their parents, especially facial movements. So if we want our kids with autism, severe autism, to attach to us and others, we must first attune to them. Because as we attune to them, they will also start to develop more of a sense of themselves from seeing their movements mirrored by the actions of their family members or their clinicians. So, how does this work? Well, when it comes to mirroring, if I have a child that's rocking, I will rock with that child. Whatever the rhythm is, I will rock with that child. If they're flapping their hands, I'll flap my hands. If they do both, I'll do both. If there's a physical movement that I just can't physically do that they're doing, What I do is that I use my voice synchronously to their body movements. So if they're running, I'll make a sound for each footfall. Boop, 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 boop. If they jump, I can clap my hands to their jumping. I can sing a little song as they jump. So long as the song and the clapping are in the rhythm of their jumps, right? So they're jumping, that sets the rhythm, that sets the beat. And then so long as I use that as the beat of my clapping or my singing, then I'm attuning myself to their rhythm. When we imitate our children with severe autism, when we synchronize our voices to their movements, we're helping the child achieve coherence between themselves and the environment, right? Remember all of that stuff I read from Temple Grandin? They don't have a coherent experience with the environment. But if our bodies does what their bodies does, if our voice does what their bodies does, then they can have a coherent experience with the environment. And all of these small movements of coherence and synchronization add up over time and help organize themselves inside. Consistent application of coherence building techniques facilitates a repatterning process whereby coherence becomes increasingly familiar to the brain and nervous system, and thus progressively becomes established in the neural architecture as a new, stable, psychophysiological baseline or set point. And that is exactly what I see for children who don't have any eye contact. They'll start make fleeting eye contact. Actually, I think I have a slide about this. This is the sequence. If there's a child who doesn't have any eye contact, they'll begin to make fleeting eye contact. As you go along, the eye contact would become more frequent and longer. Eventually, the child will look at the body part that is mirroring them. For instance, if the child is flapping their hands and I flap my hands mirroring the child, eventually the child will start to just watch one of my hands. And they'll watch it, and they'll watch it, and they'll watch it, and they'll watch it until they start to move that hand differently. The child begins to move out of the self-stimulatory pattern because they, for the first time, have a coherent experience between themselves and the environment, especially the human environment, meaning us interacting with them. So I want to talk a little bit about a few case studies. So there's a 10-year-old boy that I began working with. He was echolalic at the time. He would repeat scripts from cartoons and TV shows. He was very impulsive. He would just run out into the street without looking at the traffic. And so I started treating him in the clinic, and he would sit on the platform swing, and he'd just kind of swing on the swing, right? Very gently, back and forth. And I would sit on the mat in front of him, and as the swing was swinging, I'd rock back and forth so he would have a coherent experience of himself swinging. He would also kind of draw something in the air. I never could figure out what he was drawing with his right hand. So I would take my left hand and I would try to draw whatever he was drawing so that he could have a coherent experience of what his hand was doing. So we did this for months and months and months and months and months. Eventually, oh, and he would also be repeating his scripts as he was swinging and drawing. And to the best of my ability, I would also repeat his scripts with him as synchronously as I could. So after months and months and months and months of this, he began to lay on his belly on the swing, and he would swing in a circle, and I would be on the mat, and I would, to the best of my ability, try to make my body move in a circle on my belly as he was on his belly on the swing. And during this time, he was mainly silent. He wasn't doing echolalic speech anymore, but he would start to make like funny faces, you know, and I would make the funny faces that he was making back to him so that he could have an coherent experience of his face. Eventually, he began sitting up on the swing again, and I would bounce him a therapy ball, and then he would kick the therapy ball. Bounce the therapy ball, kick the therapy ball. After that, he found a wiffle ball bat. So he'd sit on the swing and he had the wiffle ball bat and he'd, swing very gently. And I'd get a ball from the ball pit, I'd toss him the ball, and then he would hit the ball. Well, the ball would go various places under the trampoline, in the bin with the stuffed animals. So it was kind of during this time that his echolalic speech started to shift into more functional speech because I would be like, "Where'd the ball go?" And he'd say, "Under the ball pit." So it was during this time that his echolalia began transforming into communicative language. During COVID shutdown, of course, I could only see him virtually. And at that time, he loved to show me various scenes from cartoons. And he would say, "Michelle, I want to show you this cartoon." I'd say, "Okay." And he'd hold it up to the camera and I'd watch the cartoon with him. And he's 17 now. And now he can play simple board games with assistance because he still needs some work with sequencing, but he's come a long way. So there's a 28-month-old boy that I was working with. He had decreased eye contact. He had echolalic speech. He did a lot of head flapping. He would tantrum 4 to 6 times a day. He wasn't playing with his peers. He would pinch them if they cried. He wasn't eating at daycare. He would bite himself. He would bang his head, and he was chronically constipated. So he also liked to sing the 20th Century Fox theme song. And so I would sing it with him. And he would go into the ball pit. And if he picked up a red ball, I would pick up a red ball. If he dropped the red ball, I would drop the red ball. If he picked up a blue ball, I would pick up a blue ball. If he dropped the blue ball, I would drop the blue ball. If he stuck his hands under the balls and would wave them around like you would if you were in a pool, I would do the same. So I saw this child through the early intervention program, and in early intervention, they age out when they're 36 months. So I saw him from 28 months to 36 months. So his aggressive behaviors in daycare decreased until they eventually extinguished. He began eating in daycare. And this is a quote from mom: "Eating a bit more, no constipation meant getting more rest, and more rest meant less grouchy toddler." So there was a 24-month-old girl that I saw. She was also early intervention. Uh, I saw her in a preschool back in New York, and so when I started with her, she didn't have much eye contact. She wasn't playing with dolls. She didn't play with her cousins. She wasn't giving her grandma any kisses. She would kind of wander aimlessly in the classroom, and she wasn't turning her head when her name was called. So in this particular clinic, there was a hobby horse in a small sensory room. So we would go to the small sensory room and she would sit on the hobby horse and she would rock on it. So I would sit in front of her on the mat and I would rock my body in the rhythm of her rocking. And I would hold my hands up like I was holding the handles of a hobby horse. And she would rock and rock and rock. And I rocked and rocked and rocked. And we did this probably for about 3 months at least. I saw her twice a week for 30 minutes. But during this, slowly, she began to make eye contact. Fleeting at first, then it became more frequent and longer duration. And then eventually, after a few months, 3, 4, 5, 6, I'm not exactly sure, she began to change her position on the hobby horse. And I would, of course, do my best to mirror her new body position because I wanted her to still have that experience of coherence. Yes, I'm being coherent with you. Yes, you're getting feedback about what your body is doing, through my body being coherent with your body. Eventually, she began to see the shelf with the toys on it and started transitioning to wanting things up off the shelf and playing with toys. So by the end of that school year, so this was like a school year, uh, so you figure September, October until June, because this is in New York. So by the end of the school year, she was playing with dolls, she was playing with her cousins, she was turning her head when her name was called, and she was giving her grandmother lots of kisses. So I hope this information has been helpful for you. Um, this is what I've gleaned through uh, my dissertation studying autism and my clinical experience over the years. I'm in Pasadena, California. So if you're interested in working with me, you can contact Dr. Michelle at greenhousetherapycenter.com. Thank you.